Chapter 5. They rode for a full hour before Kevin pulled over to the side of the trail, and Bridget followed him. He took the boxed lunch Kelsey had made for them and moved over to a bench, conveniently placed by the Westons for their guests. He sat down, waiting for Bridget to follow him, admiring the way she moved in her jeans and blue t-shirt. She shouldn't look good with as big as the shirt was on her, but she did. Her shirt read, "Cute enough to stop your heart. Skilled enough to restart it." She had a jacket tied around her waist and knotted at the front. When she was sitting beside him, he divvied up the food, giving them each a sandwich, a bag of chips, and a bottle of water. "I know it's not gourmet, but it'll have to do." She opened the bottle of water, tilted her head back, and drained half of it. "I'm not a girl who needs gourmet. Never have been. Spending the day in the wilderness with a halfway decent-looking guy is good enough for me." "Halfway decent? Don't strain yourself coming up with something nice to say now." He wasn't offended exactly, but he was a little surprised she could only come up with halfway decent as a descriptor. He'd been called a lot of things nicer than halfway decent. She shrugged. "Well, you know. I don't want you to get a big head or anything. Your church is small, and you need to fit. Always looking out for the needs of others. I appreciate that about you. It's true. I think about you before myself." She opened the sandwich to see what was there and smiled. "Pimento cheese and ham. Yum." It was the good kind of pimento cheese too, not the nasty stuff from a jar. She wasn't sure if it was homemade or came in a tub, but it looked and smelled good. He grinned. "Kelsey keeps pimento cheese stocked for me. It's not super common around here, and I'm probably the only one who orders it." "Well, it should be common everywhere." She took a big bite of the sandwich and giggled when she saw he had a bit of cheese below his bottom lip. She reached over and used her thumb to rub it away. "You're wearing your cheese. Saving it for later." She laughed, shaking her head. "Are there any napkins in that box? 'Cause I don't want to run around all day with cheese on my face." "Better to have cheese on your face than egg on your face, right?" he asked as he dug through the box for napkins and handed her a couple. "I love it up here. It's so quiet. I know it's chilly, but the view is worth it. I wish there was a little church up here. It feels like the right place to worship. Will it be worth it in the snow?" He nodded. "Snow brings skiers and snowmobiles. We have outdoor sports here year-round. Of course, I'm fond of sitting by a fire during the winter." He looked over at her. "It seems like something I should do with someone I love though." She wouldn't meet his eyes. It was the second time he'd used that word in an hour, and it scared her a little. Was she ready for love? With a pastor? "Are you going to the reception on Saturday?" She couldn't deal with that topic just yet. He nodded. "Glenn asked me the last time I had to help out in the stable." "Are you taking anyone?" What if he'd already made plans to be with another girl? It would break her heart to see him dancing with someone else. "I was hoping to take you." He took the hand that rested on the bench between them. "You're the only girl I want to take anywhere." Bridget bit her lip as she looked at him. "I'm afraid feelings are running too high too fast. And I don't know why." He sighed, his thumb rubbing the palm of her hand. "I think we're meant to be together. There's something special between us. But I'm going home to Texas on Monday." He frowned. "It's only Wednesday. I'll just have to work on convincing you to stay with me." "I'm not sure that's wise. I'm not really cut out to be a pastor's wife." "Why not?" He knew she wasn't the type of girl he'd pictured being married to, but she was special, and she was a Christian. What else really mattered? She shrugged. "Mainly because I can't help but tell people the truth. If someone says, 'Does this make me look fat?' I say, 'It's certainly not flattering, and then they get all offended. My shoes are made of chocolate peppermint, because it's the only way I can stand the taste of the feet that are always in my mouth. You haven't offended me. I haven't said anything that you found odd or off-putting. He wanted to say no, but how could he? She did say strange things. You have. But I don't have a congregation. My job is different than that of most pastors. What if you change? What if you decide to do something else, and I end up leading women's Bible studies? When I was a kid, they wouldn't let me ask questions during Sunday school, because I kept offending the teachers. Finally, they had to have someone sit with me at all times. Same thing during youth group, but that was because I was a flight risk. He bit back a laugh. Flight risk? One little trip to a convenience store when I was supposed to be at youth group, and there was an adult stationed at the door every day until I graduated. Kevin shook his head. I think I love you, Bridget the midget. Bridget sighed heavily. I thought you were going to call me something else. He leaned down and kissed her softly. I like Bridget the midget, and I say it with all the love inside me. Please promise you'll think about staying in Idaho. Not a chance. She might come back though. She couldn't stay because she had to be back at work on Tuesday. There were people who depended on her. Then spend as much time with me as you can while you're here. He felt like he was acting like a stray dog, begging her for scraps, but he didn't care. Pride was a sin, so he didn't need to keep any. She nodded slowly, leaning toward him for another kiss. I promise. He took a deep breath, trying to control the emotions flooding through him. Are you finished? This is supposed to be a good spot to hunt for Bigfoot. Yeah. What are we doing tomorrow? He frowned. I have to work in the general store for 6 hours tomorrow. Maybe we can spend the evening together. Doing what? I'll probably be manning the cash register. Heidi prefers to be helping people herself. Bridget thought he'd lost his mind for a moment before she realized he was answering the wrong question. I was asking what you want to do tomorrow. He shrugged. You decide. I'll think about it. As they looked for Bigfoot clues, she asked him the question that she always asked. Cindy or Belle? I haven't decided yet. Does it matter so much? Bridget nodded emphatically. Of course it matters. I need an answer soon. Maybe we should watch some more Disney movies. If I had a better picture in my head of the different princesses, maybe I could choose one. You're just being persnickety. If you choose Ariel or Jasmine, I'm going to have something to say. Isn't there a new princess in town? Something about an ice queen or something? Elsa? She was a couple of years ago. There's a new princess movie coming out at the end of this month. Moana, I think it's called. I can't wait to see it. If you come back, I'll take you to see it. She sighed. Maybe we should watch The Little Mermaid, Aladdin, and Frozen instead. She stooped down to see if the broken branch she spotted was a sign of Bigfoot. Do you think Kelsey would change plans? I think we're going to need to Disney all week if we're going to get through the princesses so you can decide for yourself. I think she'd be amenable to that. Do you have her number? I want to call. He nodded, pulling his phone from his pocket and flipping through his contacts. He handed it to her when he'd found the right one. He was surprised she didn't want to text, but maybe she was old school. She pressed the button to call and waited impatiently for Kelsey to answer. Hello? Kelsey, were you sleeping? Yeah, I'm sleeping for 2. There was a loud yawn from the other end of the connection. Can we watch some Disney princess movies tonight instead of horror flicks? You're trying to convince Kevin that Cindy's better than Belle still, aren't you? Give it up. So what if I am? Kelsey sighed. Yeah, has he seen Cinderella and Beauty and the Beast yet? Yeah, we watched those last night. Time to move on to Frozen, Aladdin, The Little Mermaid, The Frog Prince, Sleeping Beauty, Snow White. Was he raised in a barn? He doesn't know any of the princess movies? Nope. Fine. I have Aladdin and Frozen. Will those work? Perfectly. Can I bring anything? Your body and your appetite. 7. We'll eat in front of the princesses. He's going to do the right thing and choose Belle. Bridget could only laugh when she realized the call had ended. We're watching Elsa and Jasmine tonight. I don't know who they are, and I'm afraid to ask. I guess I'll find out when I get there. She turned to him, looping her arms around his neck. I think you're pretty terrific, even though you are a pastor. She stood on tiptoe to press her lips to his, wishing she was just a little taller so she could reach him better. He caught her by the waist, holding her close as he returned the kiss. I wish that didn't count against me. She rested her forehead against his shoulder. I wish it didn't too. Burying his face in her hair, he held her for just a moment. Your hair smells like oranges. She smiled. Citrus shampoo. I like it. He sighed. It's probably time for us to head back. It's a little after 3, but it gets dark early this time of year. She nodded, not ready to move away from him. I could stand here like this forever. Or until your flight leaves on Monday. He didn't want to think about her leaving. He wanted to put her in his pocket and keep her there forever. She was so tiny, she just might fit. It was hard to believe she and Kaya were twins. I'm not ready to think about leaving. I'm going to concentrate on standing here with you. And loving you. She couldn't admit it aloud yet, but she knew it was true. She was in love with a pastor who lived in Idaho. What was the world coming to? Asterisk. After her nap, Bridget got dressed and fixed her hair. She always thought of it as mouse brown. She brushed it out and added a few curls with a curling iron. She wanted to look her best. They only had 5 more evenings together before she flew back to Texas. They wouldn't even have the day together on Thursday. She would miss him, but she looked forward to the chance to explore the ranch on her own. She was waiting on the couch when he got there. Her parents had once again disappeared to go off and dance somewhere. She was just glad she didn't have to watch them. When the knock came at the door, she shrugged into her coat and hurried to open it. Kevin stepped inside, surprising her. A quick kiss had her mumbling something incoherent about tingling, but she quickly regained her composure. We'd better hurry. No telling what Kelsey will do if we're late. She grabbed his hand and tugged him toward the door, locking it behind them. Once they were in the car, he glanced over at her. So we're doing what movies tonight? Jasmine and Elsa. Aladdin and Frozen. I'm not fond of Jasmine. She's a whiny princess. I like Elsa because she has this whole girl power thing going on. You'll see. I think Belle was kind of girl power too. At least she was a lot more so than Cinderella. Are you leaning toward Belle? Bridget asked in shock. You are, aren't you? I can't say until I've seen more of the movies. How can I possibly make an informed decision about something so important to you? Bridget glared at him, before turning her head to look out the window at the darkness. Doesn't Kelsey live on the ranch? Nope. She lives in town with her husband, the sheriff. That's cool, I guess. I can't really see Kelsey married to law enforcement. From what I hear, he has been in love with her for years, and when her worthless ex-boyfriend moved to California hoping to be a Disney prince, Shane asked her out that very day. They married a week later, or something ridiculous like that. You think quick marriages are ridiculous? Not at all. I'd marry you tomorrow. She sighed. You're not going to let it go, are you? After he saw Frozen, she'd be able to sing the song to him. Incessantly. How could I? The houses were getting closer together, and there were some street lights, which told her they were in town. How big is Riston? Her sister had talked about the nearest town a lot. I have no idea. Small. There's a grocery store and a few other businesses. You can get everything you need here, but you can't necessarily get what you want. You have to go into a bigger city for that. Thank God for Amazon then, right? He laughed. I guess so. He pulled into a driveway, and they got out, walking to the door together. A man she hadn't met yet came to the door. You must be Bridget. I'm Shane, Kelsey's husband. Don't let her name the baby Herberta. Shane shook his head, laughing. I'm not letting her name the baby Herberta or anything else weird. He turned and raised his voice. You hear me, Kelsey? No, Herberta. I'm carrying this baby. I get to name her. Kelsey came out of the kitchen, drying her hands on a dish towel. Come in. Come in. Enchiladas are ready. I made a pan and a half of mild and half a pan of good. Shane sighed. By good she means so hot it'll burn a hole in your tongue. Bridget walked into the house, shrugging her coat off. You can eat spicy things while you're pregnant? She asked with surprise. Most women can't. Kelsey shrugged. It doesn't bother me so far. Doctor said I have to lay off my Cajun seasoning, because it's messing with my blood pressure though. What does he know? Shane patted Kelsey's shoulder. You'll get through it. You can start having it again as soon as she's born. You bet your sweet little patootie I can. Kelsey took Bridget's coat from her. Do you need help with anything? Bridget asked, following behind Kelsey down a hallway to her bedroom and watching her throw the coat on her bed. Nah. It's all done. Just need to serve it. 15 minutes later, they were on the couch together, while the two men sat in chairs, talking softly. Jasmine first? Kelsey asked. Definitely. Bridget said. I don't think Kevin will like Jasmine as much as Elsa. I guess we're about to find out. Kelsey pushed the button and started the show, then took a bite of her enchiladas. Do you want a bite? Kaya is the only person I know who matches my love for crazy spicy stuff. No thank you. Kaya's taste buds were burned off when we were little. Keep that stuff away from me. Bridget cut off a bite of her enchilada with the side of her fork, before popping a bite into her mouth. She immediately coughed and reached for water. This is mild? Oh yeah. It's mild. Kelsey took a bite of hers. Are you sure you don't want to try the good stuff? Bridget's eyes were wide as she shook her head. No. I can barely handle this. No hot sauce then? Bridget shook her head, looking at Kevin who was biting his lip to keep from laughing. She glared at him as the movie started, and then she settled back to watch it. She couldn't wait. When it came time for the songs, she did her best not to sing as loudly as usual. She didn't want Kelsey and Shane to think badly of her. When they left the other couple's house that night, Bridget asked Kevin what he thought. See? Neither is as good as Cindy or Belle. I don't know. I liked Elsa and Anna a lot. Anna was such a spunky little thing. For a bit, it seemed like Elsa was going to be the villain of the show, but that prince was a real treat, wasn't he? Bridget shook her head. I hate Prince Hans. He was horrid. I always wonder if Anna will get to marry Kristoff. With it being a Disney movie, you'd think so, but they don't tell you. All the princesses marry at the end. Does it bother you that they didn't marry? She shrugged. Maybe. I wanted to see her marry a commoner. I think it would have been good for her. Elsa though, how are they ever going to get someone to marry the Ice Queen? When they reached the barefoot bungalow, she put her hand on the door handle, but he stopped her. Wait for just a minute. She turned toward him in the seat. Why? He put his hands on her shoulders and pulled her to him. So I can do this. His lips settled on hers, and his hands stroked up and down her arms. I hate that we don't get to spend tomorrow together. What will you do? I'll wander around the ranch on my own, explore everything. Maybe I'll talk Kaya into coming with me, but probably not. I like the idea of wandering around thinking. She planned to seek out Wade for a shot at the nursing post, but she didn't tell him that. She didn't want him to get his hopes up, when she wasn't sure if she even wanted to stay. Well, that wasn't true. She knew she wanted to stay. She just didn't know if she would get a position that would allow her to stay. I'll get off around 6. So we could do the next round of movies at 7? I'd love to take you to the restaurant if you want. She shook her head. Maybe Sunday night, before I leave. I want to get through as many of the princess movies as we can. I'm still waiting for you to make a decision. He sighed. I'll try. She put her hands on his shoulders and kissed his cheek. I'll miss you tomorrow, but I promise to stay out of trouble if I can. If you can? What kind of promise is that? Hey, I don't make promises that I can't keep. Best I can do. You've lost it. I never had it. Haven't you realized that yet? She glanced at the cabin and saw her mother peering out the curtains at her. Mom's getting worried. I'd better get in there. Why is she worried? Bridget grinned. She's worried both of her girls are going to move to Idaho, and there will be no grandbabies close enough for her to love on. Kevin walked her to the door, kissing her softly. I'll be here around 7. I'll be waiting. She went in and closed the door behind her, closing her eyes. Every minute she spent with him, she fell deeper and deeper in love. Her mother was waiting. Did you have a good time? Bridget nodded, going into the living room and sitting beside her. We went to Kelsey's and watched a couple of Disney movies. Of course you did. Has he chosen yet? Nope. He will soon. Do you love him? Bridget closed her eyes. Can you really love someone you've known for 2 days? I knew the instant I met your father, he was the man for me. Yeah. I love him. I don't want to, but I do. What are you going to do about it? Mom asked. Bridget shrugged. He's not picking me up until 7 tomorrow evening, so I'm going to wander around and think tomorrow. I'm looking forward to exploring the ranch a little on my own. Why isn't he picking you up until late? Her mom looked at her with concern, and Bridget immediately knew what she was thinking. What everyone who knew her would think. That she'd done something to offend him or someone else, and he was going to stop seeing her. She hated that no one believed anything she said. He's working at the general store tomorrow. He fills in for people who need to be out for whatever reason. Bridget paused for a minute. I'm thinking about talking to Wade, the ranch manager, about working here as a nurse. I know you are. You do? Her mom nodded. I knew as soon as I heard there was an opening. You're not meant to live so far from your sister, and now that you're in love, it's the place you need to be. What about grandbabies? Mom sighed. I guess I'll have to live with the fact that they're here. There's no law saying we can't visit often, or that we can't even move here. We'll make it work. You need to be where you're happy. Bridget sighed. Thanks, Mom. Chapter 6. Bridget's parents were gone when she woke the next morning. It was just after 10, and she was ready to face her day. There was a note waiting for her on the counter. I made you a lunch. I hope you enjoy your day. Love, Mom. Bridget grinned at the lunchbox in the fridge beside 2 water bottles. She'd pick up her dessert from the bakery and wander the ranch. She also needed to find Wade, and she wasn't sure where he worked. He seemed to appear everywhere at different times. Did the man even have an office? She locked the door and walked off toward the Old West town, deciding she needed to start with finding her dessert. How would she have the energy to make it through the day otherwise? Her blood sugar might drop. When she opened the door to the bakery, Miranda grinned at her. "You're later than usual today. I was starting to think you weren't coming." "Not having dessert? Do you not know me at all? I thought we were lifelong friends." Miranda laughed. "Of course, we are. Which desserts are you choosing today?" 10 minutes later, she was off to explore the ranch. She knew there was a lake off to the north somewhere, and she was determined to eat her lunch beside it. She'd worn a hoodie and jeans, because the day before she'd gotten too hot, and then too cold, and then too hot. Between her t-shirt and heavy coat, it was hard to know which was right for the weather, but she'd unearthed her hoodie from the bottom of her suitcase, and it should be just fine. The hoodie read, "I'm 99.9% sure I'm a Disney princess." She couldn't help but let her Disney show wherever she went. As she wandered through the old town, toward the north and the lake she knew was hiding there, she passed a small house with a huge number of gnomes, fairies, and leprechauns guarding it. She stopped and grinned, loving the way it looked. She could live there happily. She was still looking at the variety of creatures, all grouped together into little villages, when she noticed a bunny stop right in front of her, looking at her. It looked perfectly at home amidst the fun creatures, and Bridget smiled. "You look like you could turn into a fairy any second." "Oh, the bunnies don't turn into fairies," said a voice with a slight Irish lilt. "The bunnies don't even like the fairies, though I don't know why." "Who wouldn't like a fairy?" "I'm sure I don't know," Bridget said with a grin. "I'm Bridget Taylor." "Bridget the midget. You're Kaya's sister. Come in. I've been expecting you. The fairies told me you'd be along shortly, before noon, and here you are. I have tea and snickerdoodles ready. Unless you'd rather have milk, like your sister?" "I'm not really a milk drinker. Tea would be fine." Bridget followed the older woman into her home. If she knew Kaya, she had to be safe, right? Sure enough, there was a flowered teapot in the middle of the coffee table, and there was a plate of cookies right beside it. Bridget looked for a place to sit, but they were all covered with bunnies, so she finally scooped one up and put it on her lap. "What's your name?" The older woman shook her head. "The bunnies don't talk. Only the fairies do." "Do you have difficulties telling the difference between bunnies and fairies?" "I don't remember your sister being quite so difficult." Bridget grinned, wanting to adopt the old woman as her grandmother on the spot. "May I call you Grandma?" "Why would you want to do that?" "My name is Jacqueline, Jacqueline Hardy." "No need to call me anything else." "It's very nice to meet you, Jacqueline." In her head, she'd call her Grandma. Who could stop her? Jacqueline poured them each a cup of tea, and then she put a couple of cookies onto a plate and handed them to Bridget. "That should satisfy your sweet tooth for at least a minute or two." "Did the fairies tell you I like sweet things?" Bridget asked, fascinated by the conversation. Jacqueline's eyebrow rose. "You're carrying a bakery bag. I can add 2 and 2 without coming up with 5. Bridget looked at the bag in her hand and giggled. "I guess I was carried away by the magic of your home." Jacqueline sat back and smiled, raising her teacup to her lips. "It is rather magical here, isn't it?" "Oh, yes. I love it." "Will you be at my sister's wedding reception on Saturday?" "Of course, I will." The fairies and I worked hard to bring Kaya and Glenn together. We wouldn't miss their reception for anything. I didn't know the fairies helped with Kaya and Glenn. My sister must have forgotten to mention that. "Tell me about the fairies." Bridget couldn't express just how utterly delighted she was by the older woman. If she'd told her it was time for her to move into a cave at the bottom of the lake, she would have happily gone spelunking. No one gives the fairies any credit for the matches they painstakingly make, but they should. Do the gnomes ever help make matches? Of course not. The gnomes are altogether too stuck up for that nonsense. No, the gnomes won't even speak to me. Jacqueline sighed heavily. Of course, that may have something to do with me killing poor George. I didn't mean to hurt him. Oh, no. What happened to poor George? I thought I heard a prowler and I killed him with my garden rake. It wasn't my intention, of course, but the other gnomes have just never forgiven me. I'm so sorry. Bridget reached over and placed her hand over Jacqueline's, dislodging the bunny in the process. Are you making fun of me? Jacqueline asked, her face skeptical. No. I wouldn't ever make fun of you. Bridget had learned to humor older people who had dementia, but she didn't think that was the case with Jacqueline. No, Jacqueline seemed to have her full faculties. All right. Well, I'm sure you're wondering why the fairies and I invited you for tea. Bridget didn't mention the fact that she hadn't gotten an invitation for fear she'd offend the other woman. I am very curious. Well, it's about you and the pastor. He's a good man. Did you know he's been in this area since he graduated from high school? People tend to think he's a local, but you'd think that Texas twang would give him away. I don't know why it doesn't actually. Jacqueline got a faraway look in her eyes, and Bridget wondered if she'd forgotten she was there. After a moment, she looked back at her. Oh, right. Well, you and Pastor Kevin are going to need a little prodding from the fairies to get things right. We are? Do you think we should get things right? I'm not exactly pastor's wife material. I don't know why not. You're a good woman, Bridget Taylor. You're a bit odd, and that's a fact, but who isn't? I want you to go seek out Wade today and apply for that nursing post. Bridget bit her lip. I was planning on it last night, but in the light of day, I couldn't help but wonder if it was a mistake. I'm not Cinderella after all, and he's not my Prince Charming, ready to rescue me. Do you need Prince Charming to rescue you? Despite what your shirt says, I don't think you believe you're a Disney princess. No, I don't. I wouldn't mind being one, though. Are you sure about that? You've worked really hard to get where you are in life. If you were a princess, you wouldn't be able to work at all. No, I think you want to be Bridget with a man who treats you with respect. Just like Pastor Kevin does. Bridget pursed her lips. You might be right. You go and think about it. Jacqueline stood up and plucked the teacup out of Bridget's hand. Bridget was barely able to save her cookies before her plate was taken as well. When the bunny was removed from her lap, she knew the older woman meant business. I'm going. Would you tell me if I'm walking in the right direction to reach the lake? Jacqueline nodded. Yes, keep walking north. You're only a few minutes away at a brisk pace. Enjoy the butterflies. Bridget was on the porch and the door was slammed in her face before she could ask about butterflies. It was November in Idaho. Surely there were no butterflies around. She continued her walk, her mind on the conversation with the eccentric woman. Was she really meant to be with Kevin? And have a life there? She found the lake a few minutes later and sat down at a picnic table. She was the only one in the covered picnic area, and she rubbed her arms against the chill. It smelled like snow. She didn't know how she'd picked it up with as seldom as it snowed in Texas, but one of her college roommates had claimed to be able to smell snow. Bridget had scoffed, but sure enough, she'd predicted snow when the weatherman hadn't, right before it started falling. And Bridget had remembered the smell very well. The last 2 times it had snowed, she'd known it was coming. Because of the smell. She should have worn her heavy jacket after all. She opened the lunch box her mother had packed and pulled out the sandwich there, before bursting out laughing. Her sandwich had been cut into the shape of 2 butterflies. Surely, she would enjoy them. Jacqueline was a mystery, but she was one Bridget hoped she'd never solve. Who wanted to understand the magic? After lunch, she wandered toward the main house on the ranch, hoping someone there could point her in the direction of Wade. She really wanted to talk to him about the nursing position there on the ranch. She would take a cut in pay if it meant she could live in the little nurse's apartment above the apothecary shop. A man waved her down from a distance. "You need to be wearing a heavier coat," he called. Bridget squinted her eyes, and she hurried toward him. "Wade Weston, right?" The man nodded, his ice blue eyes narrowed. "Yes, I'm Wade. We met the other day in the general store, right? You were with Pastor Kevin." "Yes. I'm Kaya's sister. I was wondering if you had a minute to talk to me. Has there been a problem with the ranch?" Wade oversaw everyone, and usually guest service complaints ended up on his desk at some point, but it wasn't often he was the first point of contact. "No. There's no problem. I'm a nurse, you see, and I was wondering how to apply for Emily's position. She told me she's retiring." Wade tilted his head to one side as if studying her carefully. "It's starting to snow. Why don't we go sit in the cafe and talk? We can have some hot coffee and warm up a bit. Which cabin are you in?" "The Barefoot. I love that name, by the way." She fell into step beside him, happy that he was willing to take a few minutes with her. Wade sighed. "It's tolerable." He turned and led the way to the cafe, his long strides eating up the distance, while Bridget half ran to keep up with him. "My legs are short," she protested finally. He glanced back at her. "I guess they are." He opened the door to the cafe and led her to a booth off to one side. Kelsey was there right away to get their orders. "Hi, Bridget." "Hey, big brother. What are you eating today?" "Hot coffee for both of us," Wade said. He looked at Bridget with a frown. "You do drink coffee, don't you?" Bridget nodded. "I do. A slice of pie would be nice too." Wade raised an eyebrow. "Get me one too." "What's the pie today?" "Mississippi mud." "Oh, yum." Bridget smiled happily. She'd eaten the cookies with her lunch, but she'd be able to save the desserts from the bakery for dinner. Sugar should be its own food group. Wade turned his attention to her. "You have an accent that tells me you're not from around here." "Texas. I'm a nurse for a family practice in North Texas." "What makes you think you want to live in Idaho?" As she answered each of his questions, Bridget couldn't help but think about how no-nonsense the man was. If she hadn't been impressed when she'd met him before, she certainly was now. He wasn't taking note of anything she said, but the look in his eyes told her he wouldn't forget. After they'd had their coffee and pie, she reached into her pocket for her share of the bill, but he held up a hand. "No, this is on the ranch. Make sure you stop by the front desk in the bunkhouse before you leave. If everything checks out, you have yourself a job. Do you know if your nursing license will transfer?" "I actually looked that up last night. It doesn't look like a difficult process, and I can get an immediate temporary license. I will need to give 2 weeks' notice to my current job, so it'll be after Thanksgiving before I can start." Wade nodded. "That will work. Emily will need to stay on for a short while to train you as well." Bridget frowned. "I guess I can stay with my sister during that time. We can get you a room on the ranch if we need to." She nodded. She didn't want to put the ranch out, but living with newlyweds when she didn't really get along with her sister to begin with was not her idea of a good idea. "I'll fill out an application now." "I'd appreciate that." He stood and shook her hand. "Welcome to the team." Bridget hurried to the bunkhouse, which she knew was the name that had been given to the building with most of the guest rooms. She asked for an application and filled it out quickly before walking casually back to the cabin for her nap. Her heart was pounding with excitement, and not just because of the thin layer of snow that was sticking to the ground along the path, transforming the already beautiful ranch into a winter wonderland. She had made the first step toward moving to Idaho and changing her life. She wouldn't tell Kevin until she knew for sure, though. She didn't want to get his hopes up. Or her own. Asterisk. That evening, when Kevin picked Bridget up, she wore her heavy coat and gloves over her hoodie. Once they were in the car, she turned to him. "I need to buy a gnome." "Where can I buy a gnome?" He frowned, shrugging. "I have no idea." "Why do you need to buy a gnome?" "Because Jacqueline killed George with her garden rake." Kevin blinked a few times, doing his best to make sense of what she'd said. "I don't know what that means." "You don't need to. Can you take me somewhere we can get a gnome tomorrow?" "I want to take it to Jacqueline." He frowned. "I like Jacqueline, but she's a bit odd." "Why do you want to take her a gnome again?" Bridget sighed. "Because she killed George with her rake." "That's the only explanation you're getting from me." Finally he shrugged. "Sure, we'll drive into Lewiston tomorrow, and we'll buy a gnome." "Thank you." Kevin had no idea what any of it meant, but if it would make her happy, he was willing to do it. She meant a lot to him after all. "I picked up some burgers and onion rings in town for supper." "Will that work?" "They won't be as good as Bob's burgers, but at least they'll be something to eat." Bridget shrugged. "Sounds good. I have dessert with me too." "You didn't eat it earlier?" "No, Jacqueline gave me snickerdoodles, and I had a piece of Mississippi mud pie at the cafe. Even I can't eat 2 desserts on top of that in a 2-hour period." "I guess you enjoyed your day?" He pulled up in front of the main house, and they went to the library where they'd watched movies on Tuesday night. "What are we watching tonight, anyway?" "The Little Mermaid and Brave are on the agenda." "I called and made sure they were in the library before you got to the cabin." He frowned. "I may have seen The Little Mermaid." "Wasn't there a big octopus witch thing?" "Yeah, she's the sea hag." Bridget found the movies while he divvied up their food and sat down right smack in the middle of the couch. When she saw where he was sitting, she laughed. "Trying to make sure we're close enough to snuggle?" "It's a cold night." He pushed a button on a remote she hadn't noticed before, and an electric fire sprang to life. "There's a real fireplace in the main room, but since this room is used mostly by guests, the ranch plays it safe." Bridget popped the first movie in before walking over and sinking onto the couch beside him. She picked up her burger and took a big bite. He was right. It was edible, but it certainly wasn't as good as Bob's. She had chosen Brave to be the first movie, knowing he wouldn't have seen it. It was too new. He would have been in college when it first came out, and going to Disney movies was not the typical pastime of most college guys. She realized she'd forgotten forks, so she pulled 2 Bell forks from her purse, handing him one. He looked at it for a moment before shaking his head. "I can't believe I'm watching Disney movies while eating with a princess shrimp fork." "You've turned my life upside down, and I've only known you 3 days." "I work fast," she said, popping a bite of cake into her mouth. "Miranda's a genius." He just grinned, waiting while she popped in the second movie. He hadn't been overly fond of Brave, but it hadn't been terrible. It was certainly better than the ones where the princesses sat around waiting to be rescued. For the second movie, she snuggled closely against him, his arm around her, and her head pillowed on his shoulder. She could get used to having a man around to snuggle with. After the second movie ended, she turned to him. "So? Cindy or Belle?" He shrugged. "I can't make up my mind." She sighed. "You're really going to be difficult about this, aren't you?" "I promised to make my decision before Monday." She rested her forehead against his shoulder. I can't believe you're making me wait until the last minute. That's just cruel. It means more nights spent watching movies with you and cuddling on this couch. She brushed her lips against his. You sure know the way to a woman's heart. Disney movies? He asked, raising an eyebrow. What else?